You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Lovett.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, my name is Mike Lovett, and you are listening to And If Love Remains. And I'm here with a very special guest. This is, I think, is this number 3, Joey, or is this number 4? I can't remember.
I don't know. It's been a few, man. Probably number 4, but it's never enough. That's for sure.
It's never enough. I'm here with my good friend, Joe Wolverton. Joey is my mentor, Libertas. He's my liberty mentor. He's the guy who I have entrusted my children with much of their political philosophy education and and history, and he has treated them very well. He has a great online program called the Margie Group. He's also a teacher and a writer. He writes for several publications, so he's independent. And I just want to, again, welcome him to the show. Joey, thanks again for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, man. I enjoy talking to you pretty much more than anybody I talk to.
Oh man, it's the feeling is definitely mutual. It's always a blast, and we always get good stuff here.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed an article you wrote in the New American a week or so ago, I guess a couple weeks ago now. And it caught my attention, and I did a short podcast about it. Because I think it's one of those under the radar things that's like, one of the things that you can't, that can easily go unnoticed, but is really important for us to know about. And the title of the article is Chinese Communist Party Opens Police Station in New York City.
Right.
Which is such a crazy title that you almost wonder if it's from, the Babylon Bee or something.
True.
And so talk to me a little bit about this article, how you came across this information, and what prompted you to write it.
Well, I don't, exactly remember how I came across it. I remember I get a lot of, people send me things and say, "Oh, have you heard about this?" So I think probably just someone sent me a link to something, and I started reading it, and then I looked around, and no one really had an in-depth article about it. No one linked to the actual sources, and no one even really named them. I think there was one article, and so I'm like, well, I can get this article written because I think it's a big deal. I think if you have, the surreptitious establishment of Chinese government police forces in the United States, that should be something everyone cares about. And the first thing that, when I put it on like Instagram and stuff and on Facebook, people are like, "Why isn't anyone talking about this?" And I'm like, okay, well, talk about it then. Don't just ask me why no one's talking about it.
Right.
Share the article. Even if you don't share my article, at least, put something about it, because this is a way to not only control, I guess on the surface, the idea is, and they even say it in there, if you go and read their, the official Chinese report on why they're doing it, they're like, "Oh, we want to show, I forgot what the words are, love and," what did they say? "Love and something else to Chinese nationals." They're like, "This is why we're doing it. Oh, care and love." There you go.
Right.
So it's like, the Chinese government says we're wanting to show care and love to Chinese nationals living overseas or working overseas. Well, that's ridiculous, because there are no two words that sound less like the Chinese government than care and love.
Right.
And so, they're basically, what they're doing is just keeping an eye on these Chinese citizens, making sure they're not doing anything that would be considered seditious to the Chinese Communist Party.
Right.
And that's what it is. And it's just, it enables them to crack down on it from a little a little office in Manhattan, which is crazy to think about.
Now, it does remind me a lot of, and I've seen. Well, I have some friends that are China that uh, have come over from China, and I also have, I try to pay attention to some um, of the commentary about China. And one of the things that is concerning is especially the student organizations, where, anytime that there's a pro Hong Kong or pro Taiwan protest, or there's somebody puts up a sign that says, I'm free Tibet or anything like that,
Right.
immediately it's these Chinese student groups that will come and tear it down and yell them down and call them traitors.
Hmm.
Um, and this to me seems like an extension of that.
Yeah, and I think one of the most little recognized purposes, I suppose, is not only to keep an eye on these dissidents, but I don't want to give the impression that there are armed Chinese policemen walking around a beat in Manhattan. That's not what's happening. It's an administrative office, but what are they administering? What they're
Right.
doing is when you see if you see a Chinese national at a protest, a free Tibet protest, or one of the, how they're oppressing the Muslims there in China, and of course the Christians as well. But as you see that, because you have this report about the arbitrary and discriminatory detention of these Muslims, and that they've been called crimes against humanity, that these things the Chinese regime is doing. And so these policemen in this police force in Manhattan, and mind you, there are 100 others, probably, but the what they'll do is they'll just take note of the who it is. They'll revoke the visa, or they will simply keep a record, keep a file on this person. When that person returns to China, boom, prison. you know
Wow.
all while that person thinks, well, I'm living in the United States, I'm free to express my beliefs. I don't have to worry about oppression or repression by the communist regime because I'm here in the United States, where they have no authority, no jurisdiction. Well, ps, yes they do, because now they have a police station in Manhattan. If you're there, you go, and even if you show up at a lecture by an American author who's writing a story about crimes against humanity by the Chinese communist regime, you show up to listen. Well, there's a guy who's there from, just looks like another, Chinese national listening to the lecture. Little do you know, he's a police officer. He has photos and your record. The minute you go back home, you're in prison,
And
or
like
or
any
worse.
right, and like any um authoritarian regime, I think about the Cuban baseball players, the Soviet um union athletes, and those people who may want to defect for one reason or another.
Right.
It's not just about themselves being put in prison or being tortured. They have families and
Oh,
networks of organizations back in the
exactly.
homeland that are at risk.
Yeah, let them send a report. And they do. I mean, they send reports. Let them send a report back home and say, hey, this guy was seen participating at a pro religious freedom rally in New York. Why don't you grab his wife and torture her, and we'll let him know what happens to you, even in America, if you participate in activities that we consider seditious to the regime at home.
Yeah.
and
So
and and it's the I think of all of that, just think about that, Mike. Think about it. If you traveled to France, and you went to France, and there was a thing saying how the American military should not be carrying out a drone war in Yemen, right? You go, and you actually show up, and you listen to the speakers speak about how the United States should not be carrying on a proxy war to kill Yemenis. That's absolutely unconscionable. We shouldn't be doing that. Well, the next thing you know, the FBI, while you're in Paris, the FBI shows, or Homeland Security shows up at your house and arrest your wife to ask her about your political leanings.
right.
what that's talking about, that is what we call in the law the chilling effect, right? It isn't them punishing you, it's punishing someone close to you so that you know to shut your mouth.
Right.
And that's the chilling effect. And that's what this is doing to these, Chinese people living in America, believing themselves to be free to do whatever they want, to express themselves however they want, little knowing that there is a police station in Manhattan ready to keep a good, thick, and dossier on all your activities while in the United States.
And here's the other thing that maybe a little bit under the surface that has to be considered with something like this. It's it, if you associate, let's say I'm in New York and
Mm-hmm.
I go to lunch with a Chinese national, all of a sudden there's a dossier
Oh,
on me.
oh well, that happened to me in real life when I was writing several years ago when I was doing it full time, and I sat down and interviewed Chris Hedges. Now, no one knows Chris Hedges today, but there was a time when he was a well-known sort of dissident because he was calling out lots of the abuses perpetrated by our own ruling regime at the time. And I had a visit from the FBI. Well, what do you know about Chris Hedges? Why are you associating with him? I interviewed Julian Assange's mother in Australia, and then next thing you know, here's a visit by FBI. What are you doing?
Wow.
Why are you associating with someone who's a known enemy of the state? All of this sort of stuff. And so, yeah, you could have that happen to you. Now, you have lunch with this Chinese guy, and you're doing nothing. And here, I guess, is the most Orwellian aspect of it, Mike, is, you talk about having not only the Chinese nationals, but any American that might have dealings with him and having this record taken about. But let's not pretend that that Chinese police station, in exchange for, you know, prime real estate in Manhattan, they don't cooperate with Homeland Security and keep an eye on Americans who maybe are
Exactly.
sympathetic to the Muslims, or sympathetic to a free Taiwan, sympathetic to a free Tibet. And don't think that, if you're meeting with someone who's a known Chinese, what should we call them, dissident, that doesn't paint you with that same brush. And so Homeland Security now knows that Mike Levitt is associating with enemies of the state, yada, yada, yada. And now they're tracking your goings on, and they're harassing you in some way or another. They're surveilling your phone calls and your texts and your emails.
And
And
that's the whole thing. It's supposedly illegal for the CIA to spy on our own people. But they're happy to take the information that the Chinese have spied on us
oh,
from.
well,
They're
that's what
happy
they
to do
do.
that.
Well, I wrote one of the articles. You were talking about me writing several articles. One of the articles I wrote recently is how the Biden administration
Yeah.
completely abolished the Fourth Amendment
I was just going to get
by
to that. So yeah,
Yeah.
talk about that.
Well, it's the same kind of thing, right? You're talking about how the Chinese, the American government's happy to receive surveillance, not because we were surveilling you, but you were having dealings with a known Chinese, muckraker, and so now we have to keep track of you too, lest that bleed into your, activities at home with regard to the ruling American regime. Yeah. So Biden, the emperor issued an edict saying that the protections that had been set against domestic surveillance uh, that had been put in place, that he's now removing them and giving himself sole authority to decide what protection should be afforded to whom and when. And not only that, he established a special court to decide if the domestic surveillance was legal or not. And those judges are to be chosen by the bureaucrats at the intelligence, the director of intelligence, and other cabinet level members. those judges will be selected by them, meaning both the people selecting the judges and the judges themselves are unelected by and unaccountable to the American people. And he specifically says, sure, the Constitution will be considered among the factors weighing in on whether or not we feel we're authorized to conduct domestic surveillance. It's
That
among the factors. So
and now,
basically,
it,
it's
so
like
it,
what was that? What was that thing that was it Stephanopoulos who famously said, "Stroke of the pen, law of the land, kind of
yeah.
cool." Yeah, so that's what it was. The emperor issues an edict, and so now, and all of the definitions of, if you're caught in a dragnet, well, how, a surveillance dragnet, well, I'm sorry you're domestically, and I'm sorry you're only distantly connected to this person, but your number came up, and so now we've got to make sure, in order to, and he peppers the entire executive order with this, in order to protect the security of the homeland, in questions of national security, and this is all to protect us from cyber terrorism, from real terrorism, from biological terrorism. And in order to keep us safe, well, sometimes it's necessary to overlook the bright line protections afforded by the Fourth Amendment. And basically just repealed the Fourth Amendment with one executive order. And nobody says anything because nobody cares.
Well, and the cabal just continues and continues. There was a story out of Montana where there was a gun show, and at the gun show, there was this black SUV driving around looking at people's cars and taking down license plates. It happened to be from Canada, and
Mhm.
um, I think a sheriff deputy confronted him, and he said he was with the Royal Mounted Police, and they said, "Well, that's weird that you're here. You're kind of out of your jurisdiction here." And he said, "No, I received I've received permission." And the sheriff's like, "Well, you sure didn't talk to me about it." And turns out he received permission from an ATF guy who,
Yeah,
again,
of
is not a
course.
local guy, but so he was also there at this gun show, and they were quote, looking for a person who is selling weapons without a license, whatever that means, and then
Yeah.
smuggling them into Canada. Apparently, it was
Right.
the thinly veiled reasoning for this this surveillance. And and the sheriff is just like, well, so here's a federal agency, an international agency that are both conducting some sort of surveillance in my jurisdiction, and I have no idea what's going to happen. So if all hell broke loose and all of a sudden I've got deputies out here that are now shooting at ATF and Royal Mounted Police people, like this
Yeah.
becomes an international incident really quick. But beyond that kind of terrible problem, just the idea of allowing federal agents and which opens the door to international agents, which again goes back to having the CCP having a police station in Manhattan. All of
Right.
these people coming into our communities to do surveillance and to not just dig up dirt, but find me the man, I'll find you the crime,
Right.
to get rid of political prisoners or get rid of
Right. And
political
not
people.
right. And Canada doesn't care. He wasn't actually working for Canada. He was working for the Department of Homeland Security, or the ATF, as a way for them to claim that, well, this was a foreign government protecting their own sovereign borders. There's nothing we can do about that.
Right.
We have to, participate in such operations conducted by our allies. And so if you talk about China, it'll be the same thing. It's like, well, the only reason we conducted domestic surveillance of your electronic activity, sir, is because you came up in a report issued by the Chinese Communist government of having met with a known dissident, and we can't have this sort of collusion between American nationals and using their citizenship or the fact that they're inside the borders of the United States. We can't have people using that as a shield against prosecution, particularly when it pertains to domestic, the homeland security and all of this. And so it's just a way, because frankly, these governments all participate together in the absolute ultimate goal, which is the abolition of liberty,
Yeah.
which is the establishment of a central authority through which
Yeah.
all rights will be licensed and all activity will be approved or unapproved. You will live in the literal panopticon, right? You will literally be living in the panopticon. You'll be living in what amounts to a prison, surrounded by eyes watching you 24 hours a day. And the reward you get is you're not in jail, you're not being tortured, you're not being fined, you're not being kicked out of your house. So you're allowed to live, right? That's your reward for living in a prison, a virtual prison. That's your reward, citizen. The IRS isn't seizing your money. Homeland Security isn't coming to your door and seizing your weapons. I mean, we know how many you have and how many rounds of ammunition you have, and we know what you do with them, and we know where you buy them, and we know we have your fingerprint and your retina scan and your face ID, and we have your voice from your phone calls. And I mean, I wrote an article several years ago about how they were intercepting snail mail and resealing it up as if nothing had ever happened and someone was caught doing it. I mean, these people, there are no limits. You live according to the goodwill and pleasure of the emperor, period. Now, the problem is not that, because like I've said on your show a billion times, tyrant's gonna tyrant. That is not the problem. The problem is the mass submission to this usurped authority.
Right.
And that's where it comes down to, the whole, as has been said by people wiser than I, the answer to, 1984 is 1776. If you want to live freely, freely is a heavenly commodity that has a high price. And that's all there is to it. But right now, we are not willing to pay the price because we are comfortable on the plantation.
No, that
And
that is a fact. I really believe that the problem is we are it's too easy. And I think I will say I think in some ways it's interesting because we have this like time in history where some people are waking up to certain things.
Mhm,
I think
mhm.
people I think some people are starting to see like the over sexualization of children
Right.
is
Oh,
especially moms is a
I'm
bad
fixing to do
thing.
an article on that today. As a matter of fact, this company is offering all of this information to school teachers about sexuality, and it's all in cartoon form about sexuality, abortion, and how if you know someone in your family who insults people because they've made the decision to get an abortion, well, that's you should call them out on it, and because you're standing up for the rights and all. I'm doing an article on that today. It's just horrible. You won't believe the stuff. Cartoons about specific sex acts to teach kids how to be safe.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I
kids.
it well and the the trans story hour and this sort of
Yeah,
things. I
right.
so I think there's a certain population that is waking up to that, but they're still in the mindset in the um it's been droned into us, and I think droned is the right word because that's kind of
Yeah.
how we've learned is it's been
Hmm.
droned into us, this idea that we have to have some sort of limiting authority on our freedom when in actuality it's the other way around.
Right. And no one asked this is the thing when I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm thinking, you know, first of all politics is local, as Tip O'Neill said, right? And if we're sitting here, there's a police station, a Chinese communist police station, an official, an official apparatus of a Chinese state government operating openly now. So obviously, with the cooperation of the mayor of New York, the governor of New York, right? Otherwise, they couldn't do it. So the question becomes, it's like when John Adams, after the War for Independence, and John Adams was in England, and he asks the English, Secretary of Foreign Affairs to please stop embargoing, to please stop blockading European ports, right, so that Americans couldn't trade. And the guy says, "Cui bono." Who benefits? And so that's the question I think needs to be asked. Who's benefiting from this? I mean, I
Absolutely.
guess, I guess, in some sort of tenuous way, the CCP is benefiting, the state government is benefiting. But who on our side? What is the governor of New York? What's the mayor of New York City? What are they getting out of this relationship? What's the symbiosis there, right? No one's asking that. And when asked for comment, it's like, oh, we have no comment on that, right?
Well, but it's the same idea. We complain, and when I say we, many people complain about the all the thousands of new IRS agents that are going to be thrown
Right.
at us, and
Uh-huh.
they complain about all these state interventions, and federal interventions, and I think to myself, well, if a locality is going to allow for an IRS agent to open up shop in
Hmm.
their community, and they're going to allow an FTA or an ATF, or they're going to allow licensing by the FCC, or they're going to allow that.
Right.
Why not allow a Chinese? I mean, why not?
Yeah.
It's just an extension of the same principle.
Right. It's all a part of this network of surveillance. And it's like I tell you, I have this lecture that I do about the 13th Amendment, because everybody, if you went and asked everybody in your neighborhood what the 13th Amendment did, of those few who knew, those people would say, oh, it freed the slaves. Well, it absolutely did not. What it said was you can only be a slave if you're convicted of a felony. Now, that's not freeing the slaves. That's changing the plantation and changing the chains from metal to digital, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And if you're convicted, the 13th Amendment actually codified slavery in the United States. It was no longer an argument of, no, you're not going to be a slave, period. You're going to be a slave if the government finds reason to make you one. And so today, when you ask people, why they don't do anything, I don't want to get in trouble. Well, it's a good thing that those 50 dairy farmers in Lexington didn't feel that way. Or even if they did feel that way, they realized that what they were going to lose was too valuable. But
Yeah.
we are not. We purposefully have been kept from understanding the true value of liberty. And so these little things, to us, little things, they don't bother us, because guess what? Just because the Chinese government has a police station in Manhattan, my Wi-Fi signal is just as strong.
Yep.
Do you know what I
Yep.
mean? I'm still able to scroll Instagram for 8 hours.
Yep.
Nothing of the good in my life has changed, because for so many years this we've made this exchange of, I will, pretend I don't know that I'm no longer free, and the government, I will grant to the government the authority to tell me the limits of my freedom, and the government knows, well, I don't want an uprising, so we're going to put it, to a certain level, and people just agree to it. And so having, like you said, having the Chinese do it, who cares? It doesn't matter. The point is, none of it should be going on. We should ask who is benefiting from it
Yeah.
and what the benefit is. And they're
Well, and I
not
think it's
talking. Well,
clear.
I mean,
I think.
what if this happened in 1775? They would have dragged him out of the governor's mansion. They would have tarred and feathered him.
Yep.
But today we're just like, oh, he doesn't have a comment. Oh, well, he's just, a crooked politician. Oh well.
Oh, or at best we have these absolutely spineless, toothless hearings where it gives an opportunity for Republicans to yell at somebody with no teeth at all. It just
Right.
making
Oh,
making waves for no reason. I've come to despise both Republicans and Democrats, but especially Republicans who talk a big game and say, you're spending all this money and you're taking freedom away from the people and blah 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 blah, and you're doing this and you're doing that, and with literally no answer from the bureaucrat who they're questioning, and the answer is, oh, we'll get back to you on that, Senator. And it's like, and there's no follow-up. Nobody goes to jail. There's no consequences for the literal raping of America's freedom.
well, complete paper tiger. It's all sound and fury signifying nothing because that way, when I go to get reelected in a couple of years, I can show that I can have a little commercial and I can have a little screenshot of how I'm on the record questioning Fauci. I really went at him in a hearing.
Yeah,
Well, it's just shadow boxing. But
exactly.
when people are, the whole cave analogy, right? When you're used to believing that the shadows are real, if a congressman's shadow boxing, you're like, look how tough he is. I'm reelecting him because he was tough during that pandemic. He really went after them. No, he didn't. Because if we'd have really went after them, we'd have had Fauci dangling at the end of a rope, man.
Yeah. No,
But we
absolutely.
don't. We don't do that because nobody's willing to light the candle. It's like you go back. It's a funny sort of intersection of this. I got a letter from, I think it was Penguin Hachette book publishers, and they're like, "Hey, do you want a new book we just put out? Do you want us to send you this book on Sam Adams, the revolutionary?" And I'm like, "Of course, I
Yeah.
want that book." And they send it to me, and it's all about how, Sam Adams could not be bought. He could not be dissuaded. He could not be co-opted by the regime, either the American Tories or the British. Could not be bought, could not be dissuaded. His Harvard dissertation was about unjust magistracies. And so from his young days, he was like, no. And so, but who do we have like that today? We don't have that today of people that will just say, you know what? If they take my house, if they take my car, if they take my job, and they take my life, then at least when I get to the other side, I'm going to now be at a place where people who during their lives demonstrated a willingness that there was more to life, right? That there are some things willing that are worth dying for. If they kill me, when I get to the other side, I'm going to be in the company of a lot of other people who did just what I did and are going to be eternally rewarded for it. But we don't want eternal rewards.
No.
We want a raise at work. We want easier time going on vacation. We want to build an addition to the house. We want a new iPhone. We want all these things.
Right.
And none of it, we're not willing to part with it because take a man like John Hancock. He went from being the third richest man in America to homeless overnight. And what did he say about it? He's like, well, I guess I'll sleep on the benches of Boston tonight. Who does that today?
And yeah, you have to think about like what was his motivation for that. Like I these people that you mentioned, Sam Adams, and I when you're talking about these people, it's funny, I think about in context, in a modern context. So like Sam
Yeah,
Adams has been reduced down to a beer.
yeah,
Patrick Henry is reduced down to like a shadow of nothing.
yeah,
John Hancock is reduced to a signature.
right.
Like these people mean nothing today because we don't know anything about what they actually sacrificed and what they actually did, and which is why I think the stuff that you teach is so important.
Well, I mean, if you go to high school and you go to a U.S. history class, you're not going to get taught that John Hancock, had all of his material possessions, his ships, his homes in Boston, that they were all seized by the British government because of him simply meeting together with the Sons of Liberty. You're not going to get taught that.
Yeah.
Because why? Because then that paints government in a negative, that paints seizure by the government of private property because of someone's anti-government activities. That paints that in a negative light, and that's not what they want. They want you to be a good citizen and see the fact that if you are carrying on seditious, giant air quotes, seditious activities, that for the safety of the rest of us, you should be so persecuted,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you're the one rocking the boat. Sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down. You're rocking the boat, And so you can't teach anything that John Hancock is anything other than a signature, because if you teach the facts of his life, you're going to have some kids in that class who are like, hey, wait a minute. Isn't that the IRS? Isn't that Homeland Security? Isn't that the NSA? Isn't that the FBI? Isn't that the CIA? You're going to have some kid who's going to be like, wait a minute. There's, John Hancock wasn't the villain of that story. And they're
Right.
going to be smart. They're going to be smart enough to realize, ask not for whom the bell tolls, because it tolls for thee, citizen.
Oh yeah. I mean,
And you can't teach that. You cannot teach Sam Adams that he gave up everything. Everything.
and he was a wild man. Like
Oh,
he
absolutely.
was, people thought he was crazy because he was just he was the guy on the he was that guy on the ledge, constantly and perpetually telling them that the king was naked, that the emperor is naked, that sorry, there are no clothes here, and no matter how many fake threads that you're going to put on that guy, he is still flat out naked.
Well, he's the one. John Adams was a good, he was a horrible president, but he was a good revolutionary. But at the beginning of the Troubles, John Adams, who was, his cousin, was constantly telling, saying, "You got to take it down a notch, man."
Yeah.
And he's like, "No, I need to take it up a notch, because the next one of these outrages that are perpetrated on these people, well, we're just taking it up a notch so they'll learn not to do any of this."
Well, and it does. What it does is it forces it forces the regime to unveil themselves for what they really are, which is nothing but a tyrant, slave holding. Like all they want to do is capture the bodies of these people and use them as their own personal serfs.
Yeah, but the thing is, why isn't there a constant picketing outside the home of the mayor of New York City, forcing him to remove the Chinese police station in Manhattan? Why isn't that happening?
Because the Chinese hasn't turned off their Wi-Fi yet and allowed them. That's why.
Well, yeah, there's no what cui bono.
Yep.
Who does it benefit? I'm not gonna. If I go out there and protest, what's it gonna benefit me?
Right.
I'm not gonna go home and suddenly have $10 more an hour, or suddenly have kids that aren't addicted to electronics or vaping, or one of my children who now decides that he was misgendered. None of that's gonna change if I go protest the presence of the Chinese communist regime in New York City. None of that changes. So I sit here and think, cui bono, doesn't benefit me. I'm not going to go do it. Even if in your heart, and even if on Facebook you're firing, I can't believe we let the communists into New York. You do that all you want, because guess who? Biden, the communists, the mayor of New York, the governor, they're all laughing at you because they don't care. You shake your fist all day long, dude. In fact, they want you to do that, because then it appears as if there's some sort of opposition, and they can paint you as an extremist.
Right.
Nothing
And
made me happier than when I did this. I did a podcast, a video show a few weeks ago, and at the end of it, when they named my appearance, it was like an hour and a half. They named it Joe Wolverton, American Terrorist. Nothing made me happier than that.
there you go.
I was
That's
like, I'm gonna take a screenshot of this, and it's gonna be my business card from now on.
that's awesome. Joe Wolverton, American Terrorist.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like, good. And they're just like, we knew you wouldn't get upset us naming it that. I'm like, heck no. I'm proud of it. I remember in what was it, 2009 when the Southern Poverty Law Center named me one of the threats to, the homeland because I was a neo-Confederate. I was like, amen, brother. All kinds of neo-Confederate and proud of it.
Right. Right. Yeah, it is a um it's funny how those kind of titles, the are meant to score points with them, and yet it's like, wait a sec, like, so what you're basically doing is you're calling me Sam Adams. Thank you,
Yeah,
thank you.
exactly. That's a compliment, you doofus.
Right.
I had this. I was going to show you, and I know the Cato's Letters by Trenchard and Gordon. I know you're
Yes.
a fan of them, as anyone with a brain is. But of course, again, something you could never. This is something you're never going to get taught in high school or college because you read things where Trenchard and Gordon say things like, "Well, what we really ought to do is just round them all up and hang them all at once." Or they'll say things like, "What we really ought to do is, since all these people in government are such warmongers and so bloodthirsty, let's lock them all in a coliseum with weapons and let them get their bloodlust out on each other."
Right.
Right? You're not going to get taught that in school, dude.
No.
You know
You're
what I mean?
not.
They're going to be like, "Oh my goodness, there's no way we're going to mention that in school." But
Yeah.
because you're going to have kids, dude. You're going to have kids who be like, "You know what? That makes a lot of sense. Why don't we go ahead? Yeah, let's do that."
Well, and this is the thing. This is the thing. This is the ultimate check against government. It's what I was talking to a friend of mine today about national divorce and secession and things like that.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I said, if you want to save the Constitution, the ultimate check on the Constitution is for some of these states to leave. And it's the same thing with any tyrant, any government. Like, the ultimate check is, sorry, you have overstepped your bounds, and that sort of Damocles is going to fall.
Well, what would happen if in a marriage, if you could never divorce?
Right.
No, what would happen? If you're beating your wife and she knew there was absolutely no recourse
Well,
other than some some diaphanous hope that she could persuade you to be kinder and gentler.
no, you're going to
If
find a
she
knife in bed. You're going to find a knife in your back in bed.
Right. And so it's like, anyway, that's what I think is, people who argue that and say, "Oh, well, there's no way that we should, uh, that we should persuade people to, you know, secede." And I'm like, what do you do to a battered woman? What do you tell her? If a woman comes to you and said, my husband's beating me senseless," you're like, "Till death do you part, sweetheart. So until he kills you, sorry."
Right.
No one in their right mind does that. Everyone says, "Let's get you out of that house. Let's get you some help." Right? But if you talk about the battered spouse being every state and every citizen, you literally have conservatives who go into some sort of pseudo spiritual apoplexy about one nation under God, indivisible.
Right.
What are you talking about, man? If you you ask a founding father to recite that, he'd shoot you in the face.
Yeah, he'd call you a traitor.
He'd be like, "Yeah, exactly. What kind of weirdo are you?"
Yeah. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
but
That-
today, you say you're against it, and people are like, "Oh, you don't know
oh,
what you're
I
talking about.
I do know.
You're anti American. You're a traitor." And I'm like, "Well, who's more of a traitor to the Constitution? Someone who tries to enforce it, or someone who tries to destroy it?"
Yeah. Yep.
And that's the only question that needs to be. I would tell you, you and anyone listening, do yourselves a giant, giant service and read Cato's letter number 13, written 301 years ago. Well, almost 302 now, but it could have been written yesterday, dude.
You
Cato's
know what I'm gonna
letter.
do? I'm gonna link that in the show description so people can just
Cato's letter.
right there.
I mean, I'll just read you the opening. See if this doesn't sound like something familiar. In surveying the state of the world, one is often at a great loss whether to ascribe the political misery of mankind to their own folly and credulity, or to the knavery and impudence of their pretended managers. There must certainly be a vast fund of stupidity in human nature, else men would not be caught as they are, 1,000 times over, by the same snare, and while they yet remember their past misfortunes, go on to court and encourage the causes to which they were owing, and which will certainly produce them again.
Oh wow. Oh wow.
And yet even in countries where the highest liberty is allowed and the greatest lights shine, you generally find men and bodies of men set apart to mislead the multitude, and who are ever abused with words, fond of the worst things and recommending them by good names. A few, it is of the great arts, therefore, of cheating men, is to study the application and misapplication of sounds. A few loud words rule the whole world. Dude, that could have been written yesterday.
Absolutely. You know what that made me think of? I was watching a segment of Glenn Beck, and he's been talking about this reporter that has been missing since April. I
Right.
think his last name is Meeks,
Mm-hmm,
and
yeah.
so he's been missing. Nobody knows what's going on. They suspect that the FBI or some sort of government agency is involved in disappearing him. Nobody knows, but immediately Glenn Beck goes to this. We have got to change this on November 8th. Like this, something has to change November 8th. It's like,
Vote harder.
wait a sec. What are you talking about? Like, what is going to change November 8th that's going to bring Meeks back? Like, let's say everything turns red and turns Republican, or everything turns blue and turns Democrat. That's not bringing Meeks back. That's
No.
insane. That is literally the definition of insanity. Doing something over and over and expecting a different result. And I'm sick, so tired of people thinking that we're going to vote ourselves out of our problems.
There must be a vast fund of stupidity.
Exactly.
Because we fall into the same traps, even knowing that they're traps. We're like, this time it's Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football.
Yep.
It's that time of year again where Lucy convinces is it Lucy? Yeah, Lucy. Lucy convinces Charlie Brown that she's not going to pull the football away. Not this time, Charlie Brown. I'm really going to let you kick it. And here comes all the Charlie Browns in America. Okay, this time she's not going to move it. And then when you fall, you're like, why did I fall for it?
Yeah.
But guess what? Guess what's going to happen next November? You're going to run toward the football, and Lucy's going to pull it away, just like every other time.
Every other time. And that's
But of
why
course, what would Sam Adams do? He'd just shoot Lucy in the head and take the football himself.
right. That's my football.
Yeah, that's my football, Lucy.
You can't steal my football.
Sorry, Lucy, but you stole my football. You kept tripping me one too many times. It became a long train of usurpations and abuses, and it came time for me to alter or abolish this situation.
Hence, Joe Wolverton, American terrorist.
That's right.
I love it.
That's right.
No, it is absolute insanity to think that anything will change at a ballot box. I had another friend who hosted, our local representative here,
Mm-hmm.
and he's a good enough guy. I guess I don't have any qualms with him personally, except for he's a congressman, which makes him evil by definition. Like that is the definition of evil, is a congressman, and because he's he's holding up the state, and so I said, I I said, man, I wish I could be at that meeting. I have some questions for this guy. I would
Right.
love to have answered. And she said, well, send them to me. And, I'll, he says there's going to be a question and answer and I'll ask him for you. So I sent, I think 5 questions. And it was things like, are you going to, encourage local people to not let other government agencies into their community? What have you personally done to help the people that for January 6th? I mean, what have you done anything personally to stop the funding of this war in Ukraine? Things like that, things that I think
Yeah.
are of immense importance right now.
Right.
And so, and so I asked after the meeting, I said, oh, how did that go? I'm curious about what he said to my questions. And she said, oh, they said that those put those in an email and send them out to us. I'm like, okay, I'm holding my breath. Like, there's
Right.
no way he's going to
Exactly.
answer those questions because those questions are what's most important. And the last thing you want to talk about in a campaign is what's most important. How are we going to stop inflation? Oh, can't talk about that.
Well, or no, just say you're a congressman, right? So uh, per statute, you have the authority to audit the Federal Reserve. So can you do me a favor and can you tell me how much gold we have on hand in Fort Knox and at West Point? Can you do that for me?
There you go.
Can
Yeah.
we? Oh, no, you're not. They won't let you. Oh, but somehow there's China and Russia are buying up massive quantities of gold bullion. Where'd they
Yeah.
get it?
So
Where'd they get it?
who's representing who? Who's representing who? If you can't tell me that, then are you
Are
representing me
you
or are you representing them to me?
are you representing the 9 families that control the currency of 95% of the world?
That's right.
And we
That
can end inflation really quickly. We
yeah.
can end it really quickly because we can follow the Constitution that mandates that only gold and silver be used for for legal tender.
Yep.
When was that section of the Constitution? When was it appealed? When was it repealed by amendment? Oh, it wasn't. Oh,
Right.
okay. Where's the enabling clause of the 16th Amendment? Oh, there's not one. Okay. So, but you're doing something about that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's your job. You're keeping, you swore, I watched a clip of you on YouTube where you put your hand on a Bible and you swore to God to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. So obviously that's what you spend your time doing because you wouldn't want to be known as a blasphemer, particularly you, Congressman from Arizona, who's a Latter-day Saint.
Right.
You definitely wouldn't want to be seen as someone who casually makes an oath to God, right? You wouldn't want to do that because you know
No.
that's one of the biggest sins there is. So you wouldn't want to do that. So can you recite to me the times that you've upheld the Constitution? Oh, what you called for there to be a committee meeting about COVID. Okay, but where's the gold, right?
Right.
Where where's the authorization for a proxy war in the Ukraine? Right.
Uh-huh.
You're going to tell me all about you've done. I know you've done all this because there's no way you want to be a blasphemer because you're a Latter-day Saint, and there's no way you would ever blaspheme.
No, there's no way you would ever.
Right.
That's right. It is.
But no one has the testicular fortitude, Mike. Everybody's so fascinated by the marble palaces
That's
and
right.
the little men who walk around in them.
Yeah.
I've got a
That's a
lapel pin that
great
says I'm a member of Congress, and I've got a lapel pin that's a flag, and I can tell. Well, I ran into Joe Biden and blah blah blah. I don't care, man.
the
How
marble
many?
palaces and the little men that dwell in them. That's so poetic. I got it. That's beautiful stuff,
Well, I
man.
mean, but no one does that, man. No one
Yeah.
stands up, and if you do, they just look at you like that's it's like that Voltaire thing. You're completely certain of who secretly runs your country by knowing who you're not allowed to criticize. Who can you not criticize? Well, that person owns you, man.
That's right.
Period.
That's right. And
And but what are we going to do to get people to care? You know what? It's going to be like it was in the War for Independence. How many people participated in that? 4%, 5% of people actually, participated openly. Now, Yes, people say that's wrong because many people, yes, I'm talking easily 40% of Americans supported pushing back against the British. But how many of them placed their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the altar of liberty?
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I bet that 40%. I bet that 40%. I bet it got to 40%. Sometime after December of 1775. I bet it was a lot lower before that.
Right. And the thing is like what there's a lot of people who benefited from the successful prosecution of the War for Independence,
Yeah,
right? But they didn't participate in it. They just were happy to ride the coattails of the men who did place their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor on the altar of liberty, right? They were happy. And it's going to be that way today. So my thing is when people say, well, how can we get more people involved? Screw them.
yeah,
I don't care. And well, they're going to get the benefit without doing any work. So what? That happens in life, man. Have you never done a group assignment in school? Right?
that's right. It
You
it,
get
it
you get the
doesn't work.
assignment.
I
You do
hate
all,
group.
you do all the work. Yeah, you do all the work, and everybody gets an A. So what? You got an A. Shut up.
Yeah,
If we end up being freer, and only 13% of Americans actually, you know, put anything had any skin in the game, I don't care. If I end up free and you end up free because of some sacrifice that I made, maybe me and you will sort that out later. But the fact is, I'm happy to be free,
right.
right?
Yep.
So I don't bother what I call the squishy middle of Americans who really don't do anything ever. They don't have skin in any game. They don't have skin in the game when it comes to their family. They ship their kids off to strangers, right? Their wives go and serve as slaves to a stranger, right? And they have no skin in the game of their own family. So why would I expect them to care about government when they don't care about governing their own household? Of course they don't care about the government of the United States. They don't care about the government of 123 Main Street, right? Their wife is a slave to a strange man at some cubicle because that's made her liberated and free. Their kids are, quote, taught by strangers. Everybody comes home, picks up a screen, and goes about their separate ways. Yet somehow they have all these loving family photos on Instagram. You don't know each other, you're strangers. And it
Right.
doesn't surprise me that you don't know your neighbors. It doesn't surprise me that you don't participate in a free government. You don't live in a free household, man. You're a stranger to somebody. Your wife's a slave to a stranger. Your kids are stopped by strangers. You don't care. And so my word is just ignore those people. John Hancock and Sam Adams, they didn't waste their time trying to convince the unconvincible. They were like, let's get the Sons of Liberty together. Let's get a rail. Let's get the tax collector. Let's tar him and feather him. Let's put him on this rail and let's run him out of town. And then let's do it to the next one
That's
and the
right. Because
next one.
it's not. It is. It's who cares. It's about. He's taking away my liberty. Like he is affecting my family, and
Right.
whether I'm doing it to help you too doesn't matter because it's affecting me. And
Yeah, if
and
there's
who's the
an
guy
app.
that's going to stand between those? Who
Right.
who's that? Who's that guy? We have a lot of people today that are standing in between the the tyrants of our age, and the few people that are speaking out against, and they're trying to silence them.
I,
And that,
I think, I unfortunately have to go, Mike, but I think one of the things that would do a lot of people a lot of good is read Federalist Paper number 46. You have these people, they love to, call James Madison the father of the Constitution, something he absolutely abhorred and denied. But let's pretend that, we know how most people, one nation under God, indivisible people, they also think James Madison's the father of the Constitution. So take James Madison's writing in Federalist 46, where he says, at the end of the day, if the federal government comes tyrannical, guess what? We have, in his day, something like we have 3 million armed Americans who will face off against any standing army created by the federal government. And there's no way the standing army could ever outnumber the number of American citizens who would take up arms and who he says would make the same armed resistance to a domestic foe as we did in the late war to a foreign foe. Now, why isn't that taught in school?
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
The first of 23 installments requested by Dr. Levitt. We're trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization